Blog Talk Radio.
Thank you for tuning in to the June 21st, second edition of Counter-Racist Engineer. Today we are extremely fortunate to have with us who I consider to be the most experienced counter-racist scientist, experimenter on the planet, the originator in person of the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept Method for countering the problem that we know as racism, white supremacy. And by way of introduction, I would simply read the second paragraph in the introduction to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's well-known work, the ISIS Papers, and it reads that her theory, the Cress theory, was based upon the insightful work of Neely Fuller, Jr., author of the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and action for victims of racism, white supremacy. Fuller, the founder of the racism, counter-racism concept, was the very first victim of racism to understand it as a global system of organized behavior, thought, speech, and action for white supremacy domination in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Mr. Fuller began writing his works in 1957, if I have not gotten that incorrect. On the second page of his book, it says it was produced between the years of 1957 and 1980. The copyright that I'm now holding is in 1984, but I have been told that he is in the process of writing an updated version, and I think he needs no further introduction. Mr. Fuller, are you with us?
I'm here.
Okay. I want to thank, first of all, a little housekeeping. I need to thank Gus P. Renegade for the suggestion of getting Mr. Fuller on as an early guest. He has been, Mr. Renegade has been extremely helpful. Mr. Renegade and Mr. Fuller both have been, for me, outstanding examples of how victims of racism should offer constructive help to one another. Mr. Fuller, I should say, to me, I cannot express the amount of appreciation that I have for this person. I have called him innumerable times over the last 10 years, and he has never failed to I've sometimes called him very early in the morning, late at night. He has never failed to answer the phone and give me as much help as I requested. The only time in which he was unable to give me that help was when he was already talking to someone else. He is one of the most generous victims of racism that I know. And I think we need to keep in mind that although he has been doing this work for 40 years, unlike Tim Wise and some other alleged anti-racist persons who are white, Mr. Fuller is not on the talk show circuit, not making a lot of money doing what he's doing. But without further ado, I want to get Mr. Fuller to begin explaining the system of racism, white supremacy. So I would first begin by asking Mr. Fuller, would you please give us your definition of racism?
Well, simply put, according to what I call following the logic, it's just a system of mistreatment based on color that possibly grew out of, I couldn't say it emphatically to be true, but it seems to be evidential truth, some evidence that it grew out of the ancient royalist concept of the holier than thou, that there are some people who are just so-called better than others for whatever reason at a particular time, and that these people therefore should be in charge, which is no problem there, because somebody should be in charge of almost anything that has to be done. If that requirement is that it would work better for someone to be in charge. So there's no problem there. The problem comes from when it's based on an artificial concept, and that the artificial concept goes farther than just being an artificial concept, but also takes on the functional operation of being mistreatment. So racism is actually a royalist system of mistreatment based on color. You look at the person's color and you say, now there is a person that's eligible for mistreatment. According to whom? According to me, the person who is going to do the mistreating. So the evidence seems to bear out that at some point, I don't know when, it's argumentative about when it first started, that presumably some white person thought of the idea of coming up with an entire system, a world system, in which people who would be classified as white by the classifiers would be royally in position to mistreat people who would be classified by the classifiers, mistreat the people who they say are non-white. It would be white and non-white. And the people who would be in the white category would be in the decision makers of the non-white people being mistreated for the benefit of people classified as white. And here again, I say that the people who would be classified as white would do the classifying of who is white and who is not, and therefore always be in control. They would be in exclusive control of being the bottom line. Sometimes they would allow the non-white people to classify themselves, but it would have to be okayed by the white supremacists. Otherwise, they couldn't keep it in order. You would have to have order and structure in order to have a sound system that could be passed on from generation to generation down through the years. And apparently, whoever thought of the idea put it into operation, and it turned out to be the most powerful political and religious idea ever thought up by the minds of any people for controlling people in the whole history of the planet.
Now, Mr. Fuller, would you define for us what a white person is?
A white person is any person who says that they're white and has the muscle, you might say, as any gangster operation would be, to back it up with the significance of what that's supposed to mean, which means all-powerful and the last word in every area of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Now, those 9 areas cover just about everything that anybody is doing. either directly or indirectly, any time of day or night, anywhere on the planet. They are broad areas, but they will take in just about anything. Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
We want to definitely I'm sorry, Mr. Fuller, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
We want to definitely make sure that we focus in on the 6 current strategies of refinement in this so-called post-racial era. But we definitely want to make sure that we focus in on what counter-racist science attempters call the 8th area, sex. That seems to be a very hot topic right now. It has been for some number of years, and it corresponds very well to what we are supposed to be, we're told, not in actuality in terms of what's correct, but what we're told we're supposed to be celebrating today, which is Father's Day. To be a father, biologically, one would have to engage in the people activity called sex. Mr. Fuller, could you tell me whether or not you think it would be correct for a non-white male to expect a Father's Day tribute? And if not, what reason or reasons they should not expect tribute on this day called Father's Day?
Well, by tribute, I think you might mean celebration, which is what it's sometimes called, or something like that. And in the writings that I've put out there, based on what I think is logic, first of all, you celebrate something that's completed, according to logic. Now, not everybody will agree with that logic. Otherwise, you don't really celebrate, quote unquote, but you work toward what needs to be in replacing that which is, that shouldn't be. And what we have now, as far as so-called fatherhood is concerned, we don't have a situation where non-white males throughout the planet can act as fathers. You can't be a father under the system of white supremacy, because fathers, in order to function as fathers, first of all, have to be male men. In other words, not male boys. Boys are subject to men. Therefore, if you put that into the counter-racist computer, if you are subject to white supremacy, you're in a boy-like status. Therefore, you cannot function as a man. Man means managing. Man means in charge of what you do, in charge of your future, in charge of what you are doing, first of all. You have to be, you might say, in a sense, father, first of all, to yourself. If you are a male person who calls himself a man. A few years ago, to kind of buttress the point, underline it, Martin Luther King was marching in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was assassinated during that same time, during that same period. Now, there were garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee at the time who were protesting their status in the city of Memphis, Tennessee. They walked around with signs saying, "I am a man." Now, the truth of the matter is, one might say, and this might be argumentative too, but one might say that if you walk around with a sign saying that you are a man, it means you have assumed that someone may have thought that you weren't. And the only way you could assume that is that you probably thought yourself that you weren't being treated like one, and that you weren't being treated like one because you didn't really have the muscle that a man needed to do what needs doing. And black males historically have been referred to as being boys, quote unquote. So boys cannot be fathers. So that brings us to the Father's Day question. You can't celebrate something or you're not qualified to be a part of what you're celebrating. You first have to go from malehood into full boyhood, and then from there into being a man. And a man cannot be subject to an evil system and still call himself a man. Not if he's being truthful. Not when I say an evil system, I mean a system that's designed to oppress him and keep him from being a man. Divert him into being everything else but a man. Being a boy, being a pretend man, being a pretend female, like many black males now are being told that if they want to get any kind of recognition, get a movie contract or something like that, they have to pretend that they are females. And it makes it much easier. Put something on your body that makes you look like a female. Do something with your lips to make you look like you're a female. But just do anything that will give the impression that you have gone from boyhood into femininity. And then, under the system of white supremacy, that is more or less acceptable.
Okay. If we could elaborate some more on that, certainly we can see that in entertainment, which is one of the major people activities. But I've also seen it in the area of activity called labor, or you might call it economics. Where I live in California, Southern California, when I go into a retail establishment or just about any place where you can see males who are in public view holding jobs, the vast majority of them, not just a few, but the vast majority of them are people whom you would suspect practice what is sometimes called homosexuality or anti-sexuality. It seems as if the basic qualification for even getting a low-wage job nowadays is for a black male or even a non-white male, because I find the same to be the case for non-white people who are sometimes called Hispanic, that they have to be somewhat feminine in their appearance and their movements in order to qualify for having a job. Did you want to expound on the sexual confusion and then go on and talk about the other 5 major strategies currently being used in the refined stage of racism?
Yes, I could, and the observation that you have made has been around for some time, and many people understand that and many people don't, because it's done in a manner that appears to be under the banner of, freedom and growing up and self-assertion and many other things. But the white supremacists do not do anything without a plan. And that is a part of their plan and has been for some time. But if you come to the table, if you're a black male and you want to be anything other than just an out-and-out boy, you have to be effeminate or you have to go into an animal-like act. In other words, you have to act like you're some type of animal that needs to be caged, something wild, something with no brain, zombie, monster of some type. Something that needs to be watched at all times, otherwise they'll start tearing up everything, knocking out windows and whatnot. If he shows any signs of full masculinity, the masculinity doesn't grow into manhood, it grows into being a monster. That's the only way that that black male is acceptable in a general sense. There are some exceptions, but very few. Now, if he doesn't want to go into that, in which case he'll probably wind up locked up, like you would lock up any animal that's going around in the streets breaking windows in cars. And you chain animals. Now, if he doesn't go that route, into full masculinity and to manhood asserting himself, then he can go the feminine route, get a nice office job, and be prissy around the office and talk about fashions and things like that, and then he is acceptable.
Okay. Now that would be one of the 6 strategies. The other 5 that I've heard you talk about is racial classification confusion, which has to do with, maybe you better explain that, but it has to do with not being able to tell, non-white people not being able to tell many times whether or not they are looking at another non-white person or whether they're looking at a white person. But it can sometimes get more complex than that. Could you please explain that to us?
Yes. Part of the racist strategy. There are 6 major current racist strategies. Now, these are not in the book because I came up with these starting with about 1990. And I actually started listing them sometimes, I think, in April of 2004. The ones that I thought the major strategies. There are probably other strategies. The racists are always going to the strategy table because that's how they stay in business. The machine always needs tending. So they came up with at least 6 major strategies that seem to be pretty prominent. One is the population tailoring, racial population tailoring. Another is racial population dislocation confusion. Another one, number 3, is racial classification confusion, which is what you just mentioned, which I'll elaborate on after I run through the other 3. The 4th one is racial showcasing confusion. Number 5, racial white sacrifice confusion. And number 6, racial sexual confusion, which I touched on briefly just a few minutes ago. Now, I will get back to the racial classification confusion because that's what you just mentioned.
Yes, sir.
Originally, so I've been told, and I have documents that say that this is how it got started. The first, in this area of the world, classifications for race was the year 1860. And the classifications were white, black, and mulatto. Just 3. That was in 1860. According to a document that I have here before me on the federal page, Monday, August the 13th, 2001, in the Washington Post newspaper. 1860, there were 3 classifications in this area of the world. In other areas of the world, they may have done it differently. I'm reasonably certain that they did. But here in 1860, there was just white, black, and mulatto. Now, in the year 2000, there's white, then next is black, African American, or Negro. Next is Chinese. Those are the 3 top classifications. And after that is American Indian or Alaska Native, Japanese next, Filipino after that, Asian Indian after that, Korean after that, Native Hawaiian, then continuing Vietnamese, Guamanian or Chamorro, Samoan, and even a classification called Other Asian. And there's another classification here other than Other Pacific Islander, whatever that means. There's a classification called Some Other Race. Now, if you stop and think about that, a police call, for example, goes out. Say, we just had a robbery at the liquor store on such and such a street. And check it out. There's a suspect that is fleeing the area. What does the suspect look like? Well, about 5'8" and about 130 pounds, and possibly some other race. I just like the people who are listening to this to think about that. How does that work in a practical sense when you're walking up and down the street looking for some other race? Some other race other than what? See, it's not logical because racism itself is not logical. It's an artificial construct. But it's designed to do what? To confuse the people who are going to be victims of it. And the racists are always going to the drawing board coming up with newer and better ways of expressing that confusion. Because when you have people confused, particularly about what they are, you have them confused about everything. And every master of power understands that concept. That's a universal concept. If you're going to master people, one of the first things you want to do, if you want to do it in an orderly manner, on a long-term basis, is to confuse them and then come up with ways and means of keeping them confused. Because the person who is not confused in any situation is always the most powerful person on the scene. That's universal law.
Okay. Now, in terms of that confusion, I think at the most basic level, in terms of racial classification, I think sometimes the hardest part to get for non-white people, because it's been around so long, is this concept that we, as non-white people, belong to a race of some type.
Yes.
Black, yes. And I think that the hardest concept to get is that, in fact, there is only one race, and it is not the one that a lot of racist suspects, that is, white people who are capable of practicing racism, say, the so-called human race, and I know you'll be able to explain that, but that the only race that exists is the race of white supremacists, and that therefore, if we don't belong, we meaning non-white people, if we are not members of a race, that is the reason that we cannot practice racism. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yes. That term, the human race, now, there's probable cause to believe that that was invented by the usual suspects, the white supremacists themselves, because you have to have your words in place. People are controlled to a great degree by the words that they use, the words that they hear other people use, the words that are used when they are raised up from the cradle, the first words that go into their ears. That has a lot to do with how they're going to think, all of their existence, particularly if these words keep being persistent and the words are repeated often. People get in the habit of using terms that they themselves do not understand, but they think that they understand them because everybody's using them and they have been using them. So therefore, this thing about a human race, if you think about it logically, and here again, counter-racist codification calls for a person to think in terms of following the logic. So you put that word on, that term on the board, you might say, human race. Now, what is a human? Well, a human is a humane person to start with. A person who is humane, a person, and what do you mean by humane? Well, presumably it would be a person who doesn't mistreat people. That's what humanity is about.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you add the word race, it's all out of order. You've done something that's completely out of order right there. Because why would a humane person be a member of a race when the whole purpose for being a member of a race is to practice racism? And the whole purpose for practicing racism is to mistreat someone based on color. It serves absolutely no purpose, and anybody who tries to make it look like it has some other purpose is going to have a problem proving that case. You can be a member of a tribe. You can be a member of a philanthropy organization. You can be a member of a religion, whatever that might mean. You can be a member of a lot of things. But when you're a member of a race, why are you a member of a race? And the average person will say, well, I was born this way. I was born this color. Wait a minute. You were born a color, but does that say that you are automatically a member of a race because you are a certain color? What do you mean by color? I mean, is a tree, what race does a tree belong to that has green leaves? Is that a member of a race? Why not call a tree a member of a race? Race is racism. It pertains to people, and it pertains to people mistreating people on the basis of color. It's a political construct. It's artificial completely.
Right. And I will have to say, as a victim of racism who's been trying to study this counter-racist codification, which I'll ask you to define and explain following this statement in question. But I will have to admit it, I was very confused until very recently, that I had a phone conversation with you very recently to go back over this concept, because I said to myself, and I asked you, I said, well, wait a minute. Why can't race simply be a way of describing a set of physical attributes, not just skin color, but nose shape, mouth shape, eye shape, hair texture? Why couldn't it just be something that describes a set of physical attributes? And you responded, as I recall, you'll correct me if I got it incorrect, was that, well, yes, but why use the word race? People look different ways all the time. Why would you use the word race? And that further, has the word race served any purpose for anyone other than to practice racism? And when I reflected on that, meaning that anything has a purpose, so that we talked about flowers. Why would you call tulips tulips and roses roses? Well, because they have different conditions in which they thrive and where you need to plant them, how much sunlight they need, watering, etc. But when it comes to people, why do you need to categorize them by sets of physical attributes? Because there are there's almost an infinity of ways that you can characterize people by sets of physical attributes if you look at people all around the globe. So why this need to do that? Why would you do it? Is there something else that you're going to do for these people? Do they need less sunlight, more food, just based upon a set of physical attributes? What is the function of doing that? Why would you need to do that? And it was only then, as you explained it to me, that I understood that the only reason for it that has been demonstrated is to practice racism. And there has been no other purpose for it. Have I misquoted you, Mr. Fuller?
No, that is correct. And I think if anybody thinks of it that way, logically, they would have to come to that conclusion. There's no purpose for being a member of a race. Being a member of a race is something you have to do. You're not born a member of a race. Black people were told, for instance, that they were a member of the Negro or the Negroid or the African race. But they were told by whom? By people who were willing to practice racism, who invented the whole concept of racism. They didn't just suddenly decide that they were members of a race. Most people on the planet traditionally have called themselves members of families, members of tribes. Sometimes they will explain it almost in a full sentence, saying, we are the people of the river. Why? Because we live close to the river. And we go out on the river in boats. And we are different from the people over there on the other side of the mountain because we call them the people of the plains. And they will have a word for it, meaning the people of the plains. Meaning what? The people who don't live near the river, like we do. And many people, they always had an explanation for the terms that they use. But this thing about race, what's that all about? Where did that come from? It came from people who invented the idea of mistreating people based on color. That's where it came from. And then they went around, first of all, saying that they were members of the white race, and then started explaining to other people who they conquered, oh, you are members of a non-white race. Mm-hmm. And then they broke it down into black, brown, red, yellow, tan, or whatever they would classify as non-white. And if the people ask questions, well, what does this thing about race mean? It means that I'm in charge of you and you do what I say, and if you don't, I'll shoot you. That's what it means. And then they got the point. We still get it.
Right. Now, I said that I was going to follow up with the question of what is the United Independent Compensatory Method? What is that in terms of a method, countering racism, and how is it different than what has been traditionally, the methods that have been traditionally used to try to eliminate this problem that we call racism, white supremacy? And if you would please, I know that every word that you put in there for a reason. So if you could explain the reason for each word in the description of that method, I would appreciate it.
Yes, it's a long basic title of the textbook for victims of racism. It's called the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. The united is a supposition, meaning it's a proposal that the people who are against racism should be united. United around what? Around logic. The logic of racism shouldn't exist. Races of people shouldn't exist because race is racism, and they should be united around that concept. Now, the independent part means each person is an individual, which means you don't follow anyone because no one has ever solved the race problem. You follow the logic. Always follow the logic. Don't follow people. You can listen to people. You can interact with people. But at the end of the day, you follow logic. You put all of the logic together that you have gained from morning until night. And then you lay it out and study it and see what the best approach is to problem solving. Because the system of racism is set up to make problems. So if you're going to counteract that, you set up a counter system in your own mind as an individual person by listening to people, by studying how the system of racism works. And then you come up with ways on an individual level to counter it, to counter the destructive effects of the system of racism as an individual person. Now, the reason for that is you can't organize against white supremacy, which is the only functional racism on the planet. You can't organize against it in the traditional sense, meaning organizational structures, meaning you have what we call a leader. Because the leader, to give an example, is right on the slave ship with the rest of the slaves and in the whole of the ship with the slaves. So the leadership is not going to work very well if you put the leadership in the hands of a person, because that person can be eliminated at any time, thrown overboard, silenced, not given any food, whatever. Because the leader, him or herself, is on the ship. You can't be a slave and lead other slaves without the help of someone who is not a slave. That's been proven over and over again.
Right.
So that's the way that works. That's that united independent part. So each person must be his or her own leader. Following what? Following what a leader who's worth being called a leader would be following. And that's logic, because logic came with the universe. Logic is cause and effect. If you put a match in water, match is likely to go out. If it's a lit match, the fire is likely to go out. If you put a match in gasoline that is lit, you get a different reaction. We're talking cause and effect based on logic. So that's that united independent part. Now the compensatory part means making up for what's missing. That's the key word in that title of the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. Compensatory means making up for what's missing. That's a law of the universe. Now, what's missing is a commodity called justice. Justice doesn't exist. As far as anybody who's on the planet here and now, they have never experienced justice. Because justice means what? According to logic, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. That's a made-up definition. That's a compensatory definition. Because another thing under the United Independent System that a victim of racism has to do you have to make up definitions of terms, because many, hundreds of the terms that have already been defined are designed to make what is strong stronger. And what is strong is the system of racism itself. And words are invented, and new definitions are given to words in order to make the system of racism stronger. So you weaken the system when you change the definitions of words. And you do this openly. You announce that this is what you're going to do. Why? Because it's the correct thing to do. Because racism has no business in the affairs of people of this planet, this wonderful planet that everybody's been given, because it's designed to mistreat people. And you make no apologies for saying that it ought to be put out of business, just on that alone. And it should be replaced in a compensatory fashion, making up for what's missing, with a better commodity called what? Justice. And, of course, you have to have a code to do it, because it's a code that keeps it together, this system of racism. You have to have a counter code, and you should evolve that code into a system. And right now, the code system is just a concept. That's why that's the last word in the title of the book, concept.
Meaning, Can you explain to us what a code is? What is the
Well, a code is just a way of getting things done.
Okay.
The compensatory code, meaning you're trying to make up for what's missing, but you have to have a certain way of going about doing it. That means a certain way of thinking, speaking, and acting each and every day, each individual. There's certain things that you say, like you don't use words like multiracial. There's no such thing as that. You say, have one race. That's the white race. That's all you have in a system of white supremacy. There's no other race. You start confusing yourself when you say multiracial or part racial, or people, going around from one day to the next scratching their head saying, I think that I'm part-time Puerto Rican, I mean, what kind of sense does that make? And what is it supposed to do? That's the bottom line. What is that supposed to get you?
Right. Now, would you say a codification is a systematic way of doing things, and it's a way of systematically keeping track of the best possible way to get anything done, similar to, or just as for an example, a fire code? There is a code that tells you how buildings should be built, how many people should be allowed to be in them, etc., what types of material they have to be composed of, what types of prevention devices need to be in the building. And then when a fire breaks out, the fire chief comes, and the first thing they do is determine whether or not the fire code was followed. And if it wasn't, then the person is penalized. However, if all the elements of the fire code were followed and there was still a fire, then they go and refine the code and add whatever is missing. They make up for it by changing or adding something so that it lessens the chance of a fire occurring again. So codification in racism and counter-racism means finding the best way to think, speak, and act in order to accomplish our objective of eliminating racism, white supremacy, and doing it in a systematic way, which requires writing it down. Is that correct?
Yes, and then putting it into action, and just like you say, take corrective action when necessary, just like you gave the example of a fire code. The fire code in a building might say, well, now this particular building requires at least 36 fire extinguishers. And we find in our survey we only have 22. That means we have to get some more fire extinguishers because they will not be available in case of a fire. And the building will burn down. We had some, but we didn't have enough, and that means that we weren't up to code standards. Same principle, a lifeboat on a ship. You say, well, how many people do you have on this ship? Say, well, we have X number of people on the ship. Well, how many lifeboats do you have? Do you have enough lifeboats according to the code that a ship of this size would require? And the lifeboats themselves. It's not just the number of lifeboats, how many people per lifeboat. Because you don't want to have a lifeboat that's designed to hold 20 people and you're going to try to crowd 34 in there because the boat will hit the water and sink. So you didn't have a correct code for your lifeboat system for this particular ship. And electrical codes and other type of codes and on and on and on. It's just a way of getting things done in the most efficient manner. Now, the white supremacists have the most efficient code ever devised for mistreating people. And that's why it's lasted so long. It's very codified. There are things that a white supremacist does and doesn't do in order to make the system work. Things that they will say, things that they will not say, in the manner in which it is said or not said at any given place or time in any area of activity. It is an excellent system for getting things done. Now, you will say that about, we're talking about systems here. It's an excellent system for getting things done in a very efficient manner. The system of racism does work when it comes to getting things done. There's more things that have been accomplished under the system of white supremacy in a material sense than has ever been done by any other system, including all the royalist systems or so-called communist systems or socialist systems ever thought of in the minds of people. The system of white supremacy has proven itself to be superior in getting things done when it comes to material things. Now, having said that, why not keep it? Excellent question. You don't keep it because it's also designed to get things done materially, but it's designed deliberately to throw away millions of people, to literally crush and stifle and eliminate millions of people on an ongoing basis, deliberately. Throw them away, sometimes before they're even born. The system is designed to do that, and that is a flawed system. A system of justice might be a little slower in getting material things done, but it's the best way in concept. I say in concept because it's never been seriously tried by anybody. It's given a lot of lip service, the system of justice, but it's never been seriously tried by anybody on the planet.
Okay. Now what I'd like to do is go ahead and finish the 6, because I promised that in the description of the program today, that you would be explaining the current stage of refinement, and that would be those 6 strategies. So I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to explain those 6 strategies. And then I know that you also include in your book the basic codification for counter-racism, which has to do with being constructive in what you do. And then I want to go ahead and take some calls. Would that be okay with you, Mr. Fuller?
Yes.
Okay.
And what would you like me to start with?
Well, you had already gone through racial classification confusion, sexual confusion, but then I guess we would start at what would be the top of your list, which is population tailoring. So if you wanted to explain how that's being used currently in the refined stage of racism that we're now in.
Yes. The racial population tailoring, just like you tailor a suit of clothes and whatnot, it's a system, a part of the system. And the white supremacists look around every now and then and take check of how many white people and how many non-white people are on this planet. And what they do every day, their comings and goings. You have to study. If you're going to be a master of a situation, you really have to study what you're a master of. So you keep track of everything and everybody. And they're all of their comings and goings. And one main thing that you keep track of is how many people you have at a given place at a given time. Now, every now and then, the races apparently, according to the evidence, take a survey and see how many non-white people are in a certain place at a certain time, and how many white people are in a certain place at a certain time, and what all of those people are doing. And sometimes they come to the conclusion, quite often, that, well, we have too many dark-skinned people in this particular area at this particular time. So we're going to have to tailor that population And that's a term that I gave to it. But what it really means is kill people. We're going to poison the water, or we're going to unleash a dam on them and flood the area so that they'll have to go to higher ground, all right? And in trying to do that, they will perish because we will see to it that they will, because we're not going to rescue them. And or we'll just send in soldiers. Now, we don't like to do that. And we'll just, under pretense of we came in there under threat of they cooking up something against us, some type of terrorist activity, and we'll just slaughter them. And we'll do this for about 6 months or maybe 6 years or whatever time it takes to do it in an orderly manner until we get that population down to where it ought to be. Or we just might send in some doctors and give them all AIDS and knock off maybe 3 or 4 million that way. And we'll get that population down. We say that the projected population in that particular area for the next 5 years is going to be 20 million. We need for that area to be cleared out down to about 5 million. So when we get it down to 5 million, then we'll cut off the killing. And we will actually go in and help whatever tattered survivors that they are and make us look good. Because we like to feel good about ourselves. That's a part of the program. You know, all conquerors do. You know, we don't like to think that we are inhumane. It's just the cost of doing the business that we have chosen, like in any organized criminal organization. And that's what population tailoring means. And by doing so, see, you can govern the future of what's going to happen in any particular area, anywhere in the world at a given time, for the next 100 years maybe, just by tailoring the population to the way that you want it, not to the way that the people who are being tailored want it. Now, number 2 is racial population dislocation confusion. Racial population dislocation confusion.
Okay.
Now, that means that you dislocate people. Sometimes that's in association with the population tailoring. Sometimes it isn't. You just dislocate people. You don't kill them. You just want to move them out of the area. So what you do is just spread mosquitoes all over the area and then give an alarm out. You got to get out of there. There's going to be malaria all over the place, or it's going to be swine flu, or there's going to be something else that I dreamed of. But if you stay in that area, you're all going to be dead. Now, I'll help to get you out. I'll bring in planes, I'll bring in boats, I'll bring in trucks, and I'll move you to refugee camps and whatnot, in which you will stay until the crisis is over. And, of course, when the crisis is over and whatnot, they'll say, oh, well, since you've gotten so used to being where you are, we might as well just keep you where you are and build you up at that point. Well, the whole idea was to get you out of that area because they wanted that particular land at that particular time. And so they dislocated you because people who are forever on the move can be easily controlled, particularly when you are the one who put them on the move. That's a law of the universe, too. Dislocating people, keep them confused. Foreclose on their house as soon as they almost get it paid for.
Right.
Come up with another system. Get them in there, have them spend all their money, and then come around 6 months later and say, okay, it's time to get out. You're falling behind. All nice and neat, and all well thought out, well in advance before you were born. They're the smartest people on the planet. Now, number 3, racial classification confusion. We have covered that.
Right.
I think, right,
yes,
to a degree anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody has any other questions about it, we can answer those according to counter-racist logic.
Right.
Number 4, racial showcasing confusion. Now, apparently the racists some years ago, I don't know exactly when, but the evidence kind of shows that the racists said we can't get by with just a few black people doing pretty well. We have done that for years, maybe picking 1 or 2 here, 1 or 2 there, all over the entire planet, and putting them on the covers of magazines and say, now, these are quality black people. We don't have many of them, but we do have a few, and we're going to showcase them as examples of what other black people should at least make an attempt to be in their own feeble efforts that will allow them to make. So they will showcase those 2 or 3 black people. Now it's gotten to the place where the cost of the business of racism is going up. So you can't get by with this 2 or 3 black people up front, or 200 or 300. It's going to run into the millions now. So in the future, in the near future, you'll have as many as maybe 3, 4, 5 million black people, non-white people, black, brown, red, yellow, who have much money, palaces, chariots, vehicles, and whatnot, and they'll be showcased. Houses, fine clothes, they'll be showcased. They will be the ones who the cameras will be on. And it will give the illusion, because confusion is about illusion, that, well, racism is post now. There's no more racism. Just look at all the black people riding around in the fine cars. Look at all the dark-skinned people who are living in palaces, some of them. Many of them, not just a few dozen, but thousands and millions, doing much better than many white people. So racism doesn't exist anymore. You can't say racism anymore. No, no. Look at all of these dark-skinned people with all of these wonderful lifestyles, swimming pools, the whole 9 yards, private planes. Look at them. That's the showcasing. But what that's designed to do is give the illusion that racism is over. But what they don't show you is the quadrillions of dark-skinned people who don't have a decent cup of water to drink, and who are starving by the quadrillions, and who are being killed by the millions, and killing each other by being armed by different segments of the races in population tailoring. But that showcasing, if you mention anything like that, they will say, oh, no, don't look at that. Look at these 10 or 12 that I'm putting on showcase today. And that's the technique. And so far it's working. Now, what will keep it from working is to reveal it, like I'm doing right at this minute. Because when you reveal what a deceptive person is doing, they start losing power from that moment on.
And that would lead into white sacrifice, wouldn't it, Mr. Fuller?
Say that again?
Racial showcasing is the flip side of the coin of white sacrifice confusion. Would you?
Yes, that would be the next one. Number 5 is racial white sacrifice confusion. Now, that works in conjunction with the same thing about racial showcasing. Case in point, you'll have a black person driving down the street in a limousine, chauffeur driven. You'll have a white person sitting on a park bench begging for nickels and dimes. So that shows that there's no more racism. On the surface, it does. But see, if anybody who notices it, the average white person on the planet is not sitting on a park bench. Now, you might say the average black person isn't either. But when you take into account the numbers of dark people on the planet and the numbers of white people on the planet, the white people who you see in any city pushing a shopping cart full of tin cans is no way, any way, close to being representative of the average white person on this planet. Whereas black people begging for nickels and dimes is pretty close to being representative of huge numbers of dark-skinned people. And that includes the dark-skinned people who you never see, who are out in the forests all over the planet, who are barefoot, and they're not begging for nickels and dimes because they don't know what money is. They're just begging for something to eat, a berry, or half of a fish on a daily basis, or just some clean drinking water, just one cup, which is something they have never seen by the millions. So the white sacrifice who you see on the park bench, remember, that's designed to confuse the victims of racism. Now, that person does need help. And that person is not to be called names or anything like that. Because the whole idea of replacing the system of racism with something better would be logically a system of justice, which means you don't mistreat anyone. That's the definition of justice. But you can't have justice on the same planet with a system of white supremacy. It will not compute. It will never work. Not on the same planet. Justice and white supremacy, it will not compute. The computer screen goes blank. Now, the next one is the racial sexual confusion, and we have already touched on that, but if people have questions about it, they can ask.
Well, I have one before we go to the switchboard. And on the racial sexual confusion, of late I have encountered a lot of conversation about the promotion of non-white people having sexual intercourse or sexual play with white people. That is done by both white people and non-white people. But there are increasing numbers of non-white people who are proposing that that is insanity, and that until, as suggested in your code book, until the system of racism, white supremacy has been eliminated and replaced with justice, that there should be no sex whatsoever between white people and non-white people. And the opposition to that, when that is proposed to white people, is astoundingly hostile. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, because that I can understand how people would resist that idea, particularly in this day and time. It seems like it would be archaic, but it's really not in function. The system of white supremacy is a business, and it is set up to do harm to people. Now, all down through the years, if sexual intercourse, which is what we're talking about, between white and non-white, would eliminate racism, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would not be discussing racism right this day if sexual intercourse between white and non-white would solve the race problem. The problem with the way it's been handled, that's where the problem is. It's been handled by the racists themselves. They determine the numbers of non-white people who are going to have sexual interaction with white people. Otherwise, they'd lose control. And it has always been under their control. They have always allowed, under their jurisdiction, a certain amount of that type of activity. And they have always had it under control. Like I've said in the beginning, you have 9 areas of activity. You cannot let any of those areas, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, get from under your control. Because you let one area get from under your control, then the other areas will follow.
Mr. Fuller,
and the sexual area is very important. You have to control that.
Okay. Would you care to explain, I know you would, why having sex with a white person, if you're a non-white person, is so damaging to the effort to eliminate white supremacy?
Because the system of white supremacy is still in place. Now, there was no such thing as white supremacy anymore, no such thing as racism anymore, then it would just be boy meets girl. It would work fine, but even then it would have to be monitored, but it would be voluntarily monitored in order that we would still preserve a species of people called white people. There's no reason why you shouldn't have species of people, just like you have species of plants and everything in all of the organism arena. People right today are talking about preservation of the forests of the Amazon. So you do the same thing with people. There's no reason why white people should disappear. There are some black people say that white people should disappear. And then there are some white people who are absolutely fearful of that, and justifiably so. There's no reason for white people to disappear as white people.
But Mr. Fuller, do we know
white
that?
People can be preserved, but if you don't have some type of monitorship on that, by the mixing of white with non-white, you won't have any more white people. It's just a matter of whether or not you decide that you want, well, like a program I saw this morning, the parrot species. They say parrots, serve a purpose, like everything in the universe serves a purpose, or it wouldn't be here. And I'm not making an analogy to people here, but there are poisons in the universe. I mean, people say, don't touch that, that's poison. But that so-called poison serves a purpose. Just because you don't know what the purpose is doesn't say that it doesn't serve a purpose. To take any other position is to say that the creator of the universe doesn't know what the creator is doing.
Mr. Fuller,
and that is a dangerous road to go down as far as the feeble minds of the people who inhabit this planet should venture into, according to what? Logic.
Okay, now I have a question about that, because you said that there is no reason for any particular thing that now exists on our planet to cease existing. But, Mr. Fuller, isn't there evidence that there are things and organisms and plants and animals and so on that used to exist that no longer exist? And so
yes.
Isn't it up to the universe to decide whether or not something will continue to exist or not to exist? It isn't up to us necessarily, but isn't it up to the universe? And further, I would ask, isn't your fundamental basis for the strategy of United Independent Compensatory Code System, isn't the fundamental basis of that the decision of the universe as to whether or not non-white people should continue to exist or not, because it forces that ultimate confrontation where the white supremacists have to decide whether or not they want to produce justice or kill all non-white people. And it is based on a belief, it's an experiment, that the universe, God, all power, Allah, whatever you want to call it, if the white people decide to make that decision, that the universe will oppose them. But if not, then the universe makes the decision that it's okay for non-white people to cease existing, then there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Have I misquoted you? Have I made sense? Have I asked a question that can be answered?
Yes, if I understand the question, the answer to it is non-white people should try to produce a product that needs to be produced, and that is a product called justice. Now, that means automatic opposition to the concept and the practice of the system of white supremacy. Now, the white supremacists can oppose the concept of justice, and they can uphold the concept of white supremacy by brute force. And they can definitely do it by eliminating the non-white people of this planet, because they now have the muscle to do so. They might not always have it, but they do have it now. So they can make that decision now. They haven't made it now. But the whole idea is to make them, if you're a victim of this system, to force the white supremacists of this planet, the white men, the white women who believe in the system of white supremacy, force them, either directly or indirectly, to make the decision to do one of two things. Either practice justice or eliminate the non-white people who are on this planet from this planet and have an all-white planet. In which case, the only thing that could interrupt that at this particular time would be whatever created this planet and the people and things that are on it. And that should be, you might say, to use a slang term, a roll of the dice that the non-white people should be willing to do, to actually force that decision to be made, and as soon as possible. Now, if it winds up that the non-white people are actually eliminated, the white supremacists decide, well, let's just kill them all. They're in the way. They don't need to be here anyway. They are organisms that shouldn't exist. And as victims of racism, we should take the position, which is not exactly in many minds scientific, but we should take the position based on logic that whatever put us here will keep us here if we're supposed to be here. And if not, then we won't be here. But while we are here, it's logical that we shouldn't put up with a thing called racism. Nobody should. The correct thinking white people should not put up with it, or any other kind of mistreatment. Stop devoting ourselves and worshiping mistreatment. Everything in this culture worships mistreatment. The white supremacist culture. Everything is worshiping some type of killing, like most royalist systems do. Mass killing. The heroes are people who kill people, not the heroes who heal people. That's hardly a hero. You can hardly mention a person's name who does healing. They are quickly forgotten. But a person who slaughters a bunch of people gets in the history books, and everybody keeps mentioning them forever. It is something eternally sick about that. There's nothing to brag about, and it should stop. But to get to the genesis of your question there, yes, the people who believe in justice should say, push it to the brink as fast as possible so that that decision has to be made. And through codification, that's what it's designed to do.
Because it gets rid of
either kill us all or do justice.
It's what
and either way, we should say in one voice, particularly the victims of that. Either way, we're satisfied with it. Either kill us all or do justice, because we're going to force you to make that decision if you don't make it on your own, because that's the correct thing to do. But don't just do like you've been doing in the past. Kill a few of us in order to intimidate the rest. That's how it's been working in the past. No, we should take the criteria. No, kill every last one of us so that you have the whole thing to yourself. And then you won't have to explain it to anybody but to the Creator of all of us.
Okay. I want to start taking some calls now. For those of you who would like to call into the show and ask a question, the call-in number is 347-633-9734. That number again is 347-633-9734. 858. You are on the air. 858, you're on the air. Do you have a question for Mr. Fuller? 858, I see a hand up, but I can't get you to ask a question. Okay? Until we can solve that technical difficulty, there is a question that was submitted by email prior to the show by Gus T. Renegade, who hosts the Cal Show on Blog Talk Radio. I have to plug that show. Excellent, excellent show. Very constructive program. And he submitted the following question, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, do you think it is accurate to say that the system of white supremacy is designed for white people who practice racism to have fun and brag about mistreating non-white people, and to elaborate on any evidence that white supremacists brag about and enjoy practicing racism?
Yes, the evidence is in everything that you see, for the most part. For one thing, pick any area of activity. If you pick economics, it makes many royalists, racists, racism and royalism. I want to keep those two words in the same cup, you might say. Royalism of any kind, and racism is just the most potent form of royalism, means you look down on people. So that's a form of entertainment. That's an ego builder. To be able to ride by and splash water on people and whatnot while they're just struggling to get through the mud. It's always been. And racism is an expression of that. Makes a person feel good. I'm holier than thou. Look at those people. They're ignorant. They're stupid. They don't know what to do with themselves. They're completely dependent on me. And that makes me feel like I'm, if not a god, I'm pretty close to it. So, the more of that I can do, the better I feel about myself. So, yes. The flat answer is yes. That works very well. It's an ego builder. In fact, that's the whole purpose for the system of white supremacy. It's slapping yourself on the back, feeling good about yourself by mistreating people who you have in complete disarray, that you have turned into virtually people who are worth nothing almost, except what you say that they're worth, and playing little games with them from day to day, dreaming up new games to play, and keep them just dangling on a string and laughing about it.
Okay.
And sometimes, every now and then, even crying about it if you feel like crying. That's what you do when you're a master. Every now and then, you just kind of feel like crying. So you will mistreat the people who are subject to you, and when they cry, you cry. Because, after all, if you're a god, you're supposed to have the full range of emotions.
Okay, 858, I've been trying to get you on the air. I will continue. I do see 281, who does not have a hand up currently, but I see 770 with a hand up, and it's showing on my switchboard as on the air. 770, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Do you have a question for Mr. Fuller?
Yes, Mr. Fuller, I have several questions, but let me ask the first question first, and let me ask you, sir, please, to keep your answers as concise and on to the point as possible. Now, the first question is, you earlier said that there is no such thing as a biological set of races, that the race is a political concept, and then a few minutes later, you said that there is a species, or that there are species of people, including a species of white people. How does that compute?
Because that's okay. The way it computes is that all we really do is label things. You can call a tree a rock, and you can start doing that today. You can do it right now. I mean, nobody's, you can call it that. But another person might say, well, no, a tree is not the same as a rock. And you can simply say, well, yes, but I've decided I'm going to call trees rocks and rocks trees. But whatever that tree is, or what you call a tree, it's still what it is. That's what I mean by the first thing you start with is truth, when you're going to analyze anything correctly, according to logic. And you can put any kind of name on anything, but it is what it is. So I just use the term species, but species is not a race. Except maybe if I want to call a species a race, I probably could, because the races certainly will, because they'll call anything, if at the end of the day it means that they have the power that they want to have. Now that's the thing to pay attention to more than anything. Races will use any words that will work in any area of activity. They'll call themselves by any religious title, as long as at the end of the day, they are able to practice racism. meaning mistreat people based on color to their benefit. If that is going to be the result, they don't care what words they use that will get that result. And that's one main thing that is often overlooked. They are the master of words.
Yes,
they
sir.
don't care what assortment of words are put together to do that.
Yes, sir, but I didn't ask what terminology the racists used. I asked the terminology that you just used. And the terminology that you just used earlier was that race is a political concept, and then you used species as a biological concept. You said that sex should be monitored to make sure that the white species can survive. That is a biological concept. In that case, you would have to define exactly what a biological species white is. Now, these are terms that you use, sir, not the terms that the racists use at this point in time. So that's confusing to me. So if you could explain to me exactly what a biological white species is, or a biological species of person, of men at all, then it would explain to me, and then I would understand what you're talking about. Thank you.
Oh, well, I've used the tools that I've been given, because every now and then I come up with new words that nobody's ever heard, but it doesn't work very well. So I usually use the tools to the extent that I can. And if someone wants to come up with a better way of saying it, I have no objection to that, because that is the process itself. It's the compensatory process. You try to find words that will best explain the truth. But we do know that some people are taller than others. Some people are darker than others. And actually, when you look at their skin, it seems to be darker than the skin of another person. Some people have eyes that look like they are blue. They might not really be blue eyes. They might actually be another color altogether, but they appear to be blue. And the one thing that we all know on this planet, if we are being reasonable and truthful, is that whatever we are looking at on this planet, we have reason to believe that we as individuals who are doing the looking did not do it. See, this is one thing that has to be kept in mind. When I look at a tree, I may have done it, but I don't remember ever inventing a tree. Now, I may have done it and then forgot that I did it. I don't ever remember inventing myself. I don't ever remember putting a hand on the end of my arm. Now, I may have done it sometimes 1 trillion years ago. Another version of me may have done that, but I do not remember it. And most people who are on the planet, if they tell the truth and look at it on the basis of evidence, people do not create anything. They arrange what has already been created. That's why we say that there may be a creator. Now, that is, a lot of people argue about that, particularly in religious circles. There are some people who claim that they did everything, or that their ancestors did it. But then that gets into a question of what is an ancestor.
I wanted to give some other people a chance to. I'm sorry, sir. I wanted to give some other people a chance to ask a question, but if you'll stay on the line, sir, without hanging up, let me see if I can get 858 on the line.
Okay. Hello?
858? 858. Yes. You're on the air. You have a question for Mr. Fuller?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Fuller, I was told by a person who I asked if that person was white. They said they were white. And I asked them what they felt the purpose of race was. And if there's no purpose, if we could just get rid of it. But they said the purpose of race is so that we can know who the criminals are. And I thought that was very telling, but do you have any idea what she may have meant by that? Or was it?
No, I don't. To give a truthful answer, no, I don't. Now, the compensatory process, though, is that when a person makes a statement, the person who is making the statement if they can, should proceed to explain the statement that was made. And according to compensatory law, the way that I see it, I am not supposed to try to explain what somebody else has said. The person who did the saying should explain what was said. Just like the gentleman that called a while ago. He asked me to explain what I said. That is the correct procedure. Not have somebody else explain what I said. I'm supposed to explain what I said as best I can, even if I don't do the job that should be done. I'm the person to ask. And that is very important to remember because that's part of the United Independent System. That way people don't spend a lot of time getting into arguments that go nowhere. Just he said, I said, the other person said, and it just goes around into an endless circle because that's what the white supremacists like. So everybody who comes to the table, when they talk about race, racism, or counter-racism, all victims are equal because no one has solved the problem. So I'm not an authority on racism or counter-racism. I'm not an expert. There's only one expert on racism on this planet, and that is the people who practice it, because they have proven that they do what they do. People who are trying to get rid of it have not proven that they know how, because they haven't done it. That includes me. So the argument is not among the victims. The argument is always between the victims and the practitioners. That's important to remember.
Thank you.
Okay. 25253, you're on the air. Do you have a question for Mr. Fuller?
Yes, ma'am. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Question from the chat room for username JusticeX. They would like to know how, for Mr. Fuller, how you see Mr. Obama's function as a non-white person in charge of the most powerful country.
Now, what was the question?
How do you see Mr. Obama's function as a non-white person in charge of the most powerful country?
Oh, according to counter-racist logic. According to counter-racist logic, a victim of racism, and all non-white people are victims of racism or subjects of racism, are not in charge of anything. Regardless of title. A title is just a title.
Did that answer your question, 253?
It was actually not my question, so I can't say if it did or didn't with any certainty. So hopefully if it did not answer the person's question, they'll say so in the chat room.
Thank you very much for bringing the question forward. Let me apologize to the folks that are in the chat room. I am somewhat new. This is only my second show on Blog Talk, and so I am having difficulty keeping up with the chat room and at the same time monitoring the switchboard. But so I do thank you for bringing forth questions that are in the chat room. Now, 770, you're still on the line, and as I recall, you had some questions that were still unanswered. If you're still there, go ahead.
Yes, I do. Mr. Fuller, I have another question, and if you could please keep it as short and precise your answer as possible and to the point. There is a concept that you have put forward called maximum emergency compensatory justice, or also known as maximum compensatory emergency action. Could you please explain what that is?
Yes, I'll try to do it briefly, but I don't like to talk about it because I'm sometimes forced to do it briefly, or I'll try to do it briefly without creating confusion and misunderstanding. But briefly, it is the action taken by a victim of white supremacy, a non-white person, that is the last action in a compensatory fashion for that person to take if the person chooses to do so. And that action would be to kill a suspected racist or a number of suspected racists and pay the price for having done so under compensatory requirement by killing him or herself, preferably simultaneously, since the person is not supposed to go over the time limit of the person that they terminated. And that decision is made by the person, him or herself. And it is done by his or her own decision without conferring with anyone, because each victim has the, you might say, duty or the privilege under compensatory law of ascertaining the degree to which they are receiving unjust treatment. And that victim pays the price for taking that type of drastic action by terminating the person who they perceive as being the cause of their mistreatment, and paying the price of having done so by joining that person in the hereafter. The purest form of justice.
Sir, if that person does not know who a white supremacist is and what a white supremacist is, and only suspects the person is a white supremacist, aside from what I would think the questionable morality of what you're advocating, period, logically it doesn't seem to compute to me that somebody will go and kill a person based on a suspicion of being involved in a racist activity rather than proof of it. That's number one. Number two, isn't that akin to what we have going on right now all over the place? People blowing themselves up because they perceive that some other people are acting in an unjust manner. How does that help to replace racism with justice? Thank you.
Well, that's why I changed the last word from justice to action, which it'll be in the next book. That was pointed out to me. Now, I'd like to say this. I'd like to say this in connection with it, so that we will get clarity here. Going back to the individual victim's perspective, so that victims don't get into a long argument about that. Now, the person who does that has already made that decision. So therefore, according to compensatory law, since the person who didn't do it, has no part in it. I'm describing an action in words. But whether it makes sense or not to someone else doesn't matter, except to the person who actually does it, according to the way that I described it. I'm only describing an action. Now, the person who does it makes the determination and pays the price for having made that determination. Now, people who are the spectators of it or who hear about it, they can make all the comments they want about whether it was or it wasn't, or whether it should or it shouldn't. But since they didn't do it, they have nothing to do with it. And there is a logical reason for doing it that way, and that's to keep what somebody else does from being argumentative among people who weren't involved in the doing. And that's very important in this type of war, because that comes under the heading of war and counter-war.
Sir, if I'm a victim of racism, but I judge that a person of a particular shade, let's say beige, whatever beige is supposed to be, is not a person of color, but it's not a non-white person, it's a white person. Not give that person based on my perception of what their color is, my perception of whether they're white or not. I can call it an action. I can call it justice. At the end of the day, I am mistreating person based on my perception of whether they are white or non-white, and I may be mistaken because white is redefined all the time and non-white is redefined all the time because it's a political concept rather than a biological species. So I still do not see how an action such as this will further the demise of racism, white supremacy. It does not compute to me, sir.
Yes. And under the counter-racist logic, that's called what you call victims guaranteed qualifications. You are qualified to take that position. So that means that you just make sure that you don't do anything like that, because that's apparently the position that you have taken.
Sir, it's not a victim qualified taking a position and being qualified to take a position is one thing. Being correct about the position is another thing. The code, from what I understand, is about doing things correctly and in a just manner. Now, you can, as far as I understand. Now, I still do not understand how your position logically computes. You know, and you know you are qualified to say what you're saying, but it still doesn't mean that it's logical, sir.
Sir, may I respond?
I didn't quite. Okay, but I didn't quite understand his remarks. But if I think I understand his remarks, many people have said something similar to what he's saying. Not only about that, but about many things in what I call the compensatory code. But the compensatory code is open-ended. So all a person has to do is exactly what he is doing. He's correct in taking the position that he's taken because as a victim of racism, presumably, there is such a thing as racism, and there is such a thing as a victim. And if he considers himself a victim of racism, which is what all of this is addressed to, he has the choice of rejecting everything, not just what I'm saying now. First of all, to question it, and if it doesn't make sense to him, the code itself says if something doesn't make sense to you, you simply don't follow it. You don't do it. You follow logic. I keep repeating that over and over again. Now, if what I am saying is illogical to the speaker, to the person who is asking this question,
correct.
Everything, not just the maximum emergency compensatory action, everything that I have said that doesn't sound logical can and should be, and I'm going to repeat it, can and should be rejected. Because, see, the whole idea that is different from a lot of things that are going on out here, it's not about the person who is making remarks about the approach to ending racism. It's about the logic that it takes to actually do it. So if that person sees anything that shouldn't be done or anything that should be done, that person has a duty to follow what they think should be done or said, regardless of what Neely Fuller says or anyone else says, white or non-white.
And all
that is the prescription. And that is something that is really different about the compensatory code. What everybody says who's a victim is valid.
Mr. Fuller, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to agree with you. And what I was going to say at the time that he raised that question was that if he finds it illogical, then that suggested piece of action would not be part of his code.
Absolutely. It's
right.
just that simple.
Right.
If it's logical to another person, then that person, will say, well, it's logical to me, regardless of whether it's logical to you or not.
Mr. Fuller.
The United Independent System is totally democratic. Totally. People always say they believe in democracy until they see it. Then they have a problem with it.
Mr. Fuller.
But I'm going, yes, go ahead, sir. First, let me say this, 770. I appreciate you. I believe I heard you on the special edition of the Cal Show last night, and I appreciate your tenacity with which you follow logic. It's unusual even amongst those people who have read the code book, and I appreciate it. So I want you to go forth with your question, sir.
Thank you. I wasn't on the call show last night, but in any case, Mr. Fuller, one more time, and you tell us you are a victim of racism. Now, I have seen pictures of you, sir, and in those pictures, you look relatively light-skinned compared to other people who are darker-skinned. Now, I'm a victim of racism myself. Now, if I decide that I decided that your shade of lightness is light enough for me for you to be considered white. Now, I think that you are, if I would think that you are being a racist who's acting as if he's a white supremacist, then according to the logic of this maximum emergency compensatory action, if I take the subjective position that you are a racist, then I could go and kill you because I thought that you are actually a racist. Now, that makes my individual decision, but it does affect you. It affects your family. It affects, whoever your friends. It affects whoever acts with you. So to say that it's just a matter of, well, the individual person will do it or not do it is, I think, misleading. So I think, and now the other thing about the code is that a lot of people are being influenced by what you're saying. And a lot of people are not thinking through about what you're saying in the book. A lot of people are using the book like they use the Bible. I've noticed that among a lot of so-called counter-racists. Now, what you are saying here is illogical, because do you want people to decide that you are white based on some definition of whiteness that they make up, when white is actually a political category and not a biological category? Do you see how that is a problem, and that it is a problem not just for an individual victim of racism, but is a problem in general because your code does not just address individuals, it addresses the whole range of people. So it is very important that if this is illogical, that you correct it and that you eliminate it from the code. If you think it's logical, that's a different thing. But I think it is obvious that it is illogical, sir, and it has a lot of influence over a lot of people. Thank you. That's it. No.
Okay.
Hello?
I think that he concluded his statement, but I think the question that was basically summarizing his sentiment was whether or not you should take that part of your suggestions out of your personal code, Mr. Fuller, because it is illogical.
It is not in my personal code.
No, out of the code book.
It's in a code book of counter-racism. Now, proof that it is not in my personal code is because I haven't done it. Everything at the end of the day comes down to what a person actually does. In that way, it's different from a lot of religions where a person can talk and talk and talk and talk and not do anything that they're talking about. Codification is about what you do. That's the only thing that proves that you believe in what you're talking about. That's the only proof that there is, because there's no other logical proof. Codification is different. It's different from anything that's been presented so far.
Well, I agree with that, Mr. Fuller.
Now the position. Now I'm taking that position because I've made comparisons and whatnot. Now even that statement can be incorrect. But I'm saying it's different.
Mr. Fuller, is writing something that you do? Is writing something that you do?
Yes.
So you did write that suggestion. That's a do.
These are suggestions.
Okay.
Because no one has ever solved the race problem. So you have to, or you can, you don't have to, but you can put in all kinds of options, all kinds of approaches. Because the white supremacists will definitely use any kind of approach that will work for them. And sometimes they don't know what approach to take until they take it. So anything that anybody says, that's why I'm saying everything that the gentleman is suggesting, including that not be a part of a counter-racist code. He can say that, and he can not only say that, he can do it, and he can go around and tell people. Don't pay any attention to any suggestion like that. He can do that. There's nothing to prevent him from doing that except the racists themselves, because they have the power to shut me down or anybody else who's a victim. Because they are not victims. So they can do whatever they want to.
How can you disavow responsibility for something that you advocate in a book that is distributed widely?
Why?
And hold on. And supremacists themselves usually do not the killing. They usually suggest to other people to do the killing of non-white people, including one of the foremost white supremacists we know about, Adolf Hitler, who didn't kill one single non-white person himself, but certainly put forward the suggestion of defining certain people as non-white and having them killed or having them incarcerated, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if we are making him responsible for what he wrote and what he suggested, can you not be responsible for what you wrote and what you suggested? That, again, is not logical.
Okay, so I'm going to take...
Okay, I'd like to... Here again, I'd like to explain something that's different. I don't have any army that I'm commanding. I don't intend to have one. I am a person who makes suggestions in a laboratory about a poison called racism and what the antidotes are, possibly. But I cannot prove that these are antidotes because it's never been done by anybody. And that's all that I'm doing. And everybody can do that. It's not anyone who can't do that, and it's not anyone who shouldn't be allowed to do it, including everything that you are saying. Now, you can make suggestions about the best way for this to be approached. And one of those suggestions is to reject all of my suggestions. And that's all you have to do. It's exactly what you're doing now.
I have a question for 770.
That's all that has to be done. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for 770. I'm going to take a hostess privilege.
All right.
770, in the event that I, as a non-white person, have been mistreated to the point where I simply cannot take existing in this state anymore. It's just gotten to be too difficult. I'm hungry most of the time. I feel like I'm going crazy. I can't stand to see my offspring suffering. I don't want to be here anymore. I feel like if I stay here longer, I will do damage to myself and other people around me. But even if I don't do that, I just can't take it anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. Does it promote justice if I'm seeking justice and not practicing racism as a non-white person? Does it promote justice for me to take myself out as a person who's trying to counter racism and reduce the numbers of people who are trying to counter racism by at least one, while the numbers of people who are out there practicing racism remain unchanged?
Logically, I don't think so, because just because you take yourself out doesn't mean that the system of racism is going to be eliminated. If all non-white people, all people that are considered non-white would be erased from the planet today, other white people would just be converted into non-white people by the white supremacists, because racism, white supremacy, needs non-white people in order to exist. So, and we see it every day that white people get converted into non-white people. Take Hussein, the former leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein. As far as he was concerned, he was a white person. As far as a lot of other people are concerned, he was a white person. He quote unquote.
I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing that you asked Mr. Fuller. I don't want this to degenerate into a disorganized debate, sir. But I'm going to ask you to do the same thing that you asked Mr. Fuller to do, which is to be concise with your answer.
I will.
So that was a yes or no.
Now this person is now all of a sudden defined as non-white and was killed. In other words, you killing yourself is not going to make a whit of a difference logically to the system. I'm done. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hello. Hello?
I think they're having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Or they may have cut you off and cut the rest of the callers off.
Huh? I'm sorry?
Hello? Can I ask you a question, 770?
Yes.
Why do you feel you have to challenge this? Is it just not okay enough to, if you don't want to do it, then don't do it, and whoever else doesn't want to do it, then they don't do it either?
Well, because what happens is that non-white people tend not to think logically. They tend to be emotional. And because they're emotional and are not logical thinkers, they tend to go and find themselves a messiah. A lot of people are treating Mr. Fuller as if he's a messiah, and they follow whatever is in the code book without question. I've experienced this.
Shouldn't your concerns be addressed to those individuals and not Mr. Fuller? He's simply exercising his right, and it's an individual thing with him. He's not telling anyone to follow him. So shouldn't you address your concerns to those people that are doing something other than what the code book suggests, and then making him the law and following his code book like the Bible?
Of course, and I do that, but at the same time, if Mr. Fuller says something that is incorrect and illogical and is not does not serve to get rid of the white supremacy, then that needs to be pointed out. For example, you're here listening to Mr. Fuller. That's not because he's just some person, but because he's the author of the code book. So he has influence.
I'm not one of those people that
Okay, can I get a 1 from someone if I can be heard? I'm supposed to have been reconnected. Can someone simply type a 1 if they can hear me?
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence?
Try to turn down the volume.
Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree?
If you'll bear with this commercial, we'll be able to continue.
At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace.
Okay, I am a victim of racism, and I am extremely retarded in my skills. I must just make that statement. I am going to do my very best to increase my skills. If you can hear me, may I have another 1, please? The show is going to end its live streaming in about 20 seconds, so if you want to call, you can. Can anyone hear me? Can I get a 1 if you can hear me? Okay. So we'll continue the discussion over the phone. So if there are folks who want to call the number 347-633-9734, please do so now so that we can continue talking. If not, I'm going to have to, close the show out with apologies for my very retarded technical and hosting skills, and with a sincere promise to improve them the next time I have a guest of the caliber of Mr. Fuller. I apologize to the extent that it was not constructive. I do see 702 on the line. I'm going to pick that up. And I see 858 on the line.
I'm back connected.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can
hear you. I can hear you 702,
and
I can also hear you 858.
Which one am I? Can anybody hear me?
I can definitely hear you.
Oh, good. I've been saying this for a long. I've been hollering 1 for a long time.
I am so sorry.
1? That's all right. I'm not going to hang up. I'm going to hang in there.
Okay. Mr. Fuller is no longer with us. My technical skills are not allowing me to get him back on the phone. He's probably wondering what happened, but given his experience.
Can I say something?
Please do.
I don't follow anybody, but I've read Fuller's work from way back in the day, okay, when he talked about that window, you know, of them opening that window every so often and letting them, you know. And my thing is that my only problem is this, that we have been so broken down, manipulated, until that we can't stand there and listen to the other person's, you know, view. Do you hear me?
I do hear you. I do hear you.
So the thing of it is that we have to learn. We have to, you know, I'm going to tell you this off the top. religion is something that it keeps us separated, and it keeps us in this land that's called good and bad. And to me, the only thing you can do is agree or disagree with a person. That's it. You know, and it's you know, to me, the guy, I don't know why he was attacking him. I can't figure out why he was attacking Fuller. And the guy, I respect Fuller because I would have done the same thing. Like, I'm explaining it to you, and I'm telling you, you can change anything you want because we can. You know?
Right.
And
right.
I waited all that time, and it was really, you know, I know you feel bad being a hostess and stuff, but you didn't do bad. You don't have nothing to do with the radio things and what they do to us. They do these things to us. People don't understand that. I just wanted to say that because, see, when you understand that you're in a real war for real, then you'll start appreciating other thoughts that's out there like Fuller's. You know, we're not following anyone, and it's not about following anyone, worshiping anyone, you know, any of that. It's just that we all are trying to pull this together because we have been in this situation for a long time, and we are all walking around like saying, come on, we know we can come out of this, you know. So
right.
That's
right.
all I wanted to say, and I appreciate you having him on. And
thank you so much.
You could put it on YouTube or something, and even that little part he was explaining, we could hear again.
Right. Yeah. I've learned to just accept that, you know, I'm always trying to improve, and I feel that Mr. Fuller didn't necessarily get the best platform to explain his views, but I also appreciated that the fellow's views. I've forgotten what area code he was calling from, but. I probably should have gone to allowed other people to express their views because I don't know that there was much else that could have been said. But you know, we live and we learn. So.
Well, it's all good. You did good, sister. You know, ain't nothing wrong with it. You did good. You presented something. That's the best you can do, and that's what people have to learn. We have to. It's a process to be deprogrammed, and that's what people don't understand. Even the gentleman that was calling up, he has to understand this is all a programmed, suggestible thing. And all we're doing is being deprogrammed when we're trying to come into ourselves. That's it. And there's many different ways of getting there. There's no one way of getting there. There's many different ways. And each person that can offer something that works for them, and you know, that's all that's all that people can do. That's all we can do. That's it. You know. So
correct.
You did a good job. You have a wonderful evening. I'll continue listening to you.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm going to close out the show now. I do want to respond to some of the comments in the chat room. I am deficient in both my technical savvy and also my hosting. Yes, I should have known when to cut the cord. Thank you very much for that, and I will attempt to do better on my next show. Okay?
I have a question before you go. Where can I find the chat room?
This chat room?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this chat room is only open when I actually have a program on. So, and I have the next program I have scheduled will be Dr. Frances Cress-Welsing next week.
Frances Cress-Welsing is coming on there?
Yes, next Sunday, same time.
Well, you get your skills together, lady.
I will. I absolutely will.
You need some help. You let me know, because I got Frances. I used to go see her all the time in New York. All of these people are coming out of the woodworks now. I know something must be going, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that I had this opportunity to know that I've got some things I need to work out, but Dr. Welsing is coming on next week, same time, same channel, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 Eastern, and the beginning subject will be, should white people be adopting non-white children?
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yeah, and there's some preparatory video. I don't know if folks have seen that Bruno commercial for the movie that's coming out on July 10th, which is all about the mistreatment of non-white children being adopted by white persons. But and everybody seems to think that's very funny and doesn't seem to understand the significance of that. But Dr. Welsing will be on to discourse on that. So I want to thank everyone for bearing with me, and I hope you will stick with me as I grow. I believe that I will, and I appreciate you all tuning in, and also all those of you who are in the chat room. To Mr. Edward Williams at counterracism.com. Again, I'm sorry if your whole commercial did not play. I attempted to have it start up at the beginning of the show, and that didn't go off even though I thought I had checked the box for that. So, again, thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you will all return next week, 2 p.m., for Dr. Francis Cresswell. Tuning out.